I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Shahina Ghazanfar. She will be doing a lecture titled Preserving Culture Through Plants. Shahina is a botanist and author and will discuss the diverse vegetation of the UAE and Arabian landscape. I also just want to make a note that she's also the author of the book called Handbook of Arabian Medicinal Plants, which was quite instrumental in Sanuj and Namrata's research. So please join me in welcoming Shahina to the stage.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Is that voice okay? And thank you very much for this absolutely fascinating talk. I've never seen goats in that light, as you will see in this. So my name is Shahina, as Dawn introduced, and thank you very much, Dawn. I'm with the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew, where I work as a senior botanist. One of my aims, basically, is to bring into our consciousness is that not only conservation is important, but also you can preserve a certain tradition or a certain culture through the agency of plants. So this is something of a double take. You're preserving a plant because that is associated with some sort of culture that is found in a particular region. So in every region of the world, I think, we have a very sort of a multicultural society that we live in. And in every region of the world, there is something that is associated with plants, whether it is a funeral, whether it is a marriage, whether it is just a festive occasion, there are always plants that are associated with it. And in this way, what I'm going to talk about more is how we can actually preserve a culture and preserve those plants as well. I will be talking about the vegetation of the United Arab Emirates. I've been associated with this region forever and know the plants of the whole of the Arabian Peninsula. Not only just the natural vegetation, but also plants that have been used for medicinal purposes, for cultural reasons, and for the biogeography, how they connect with other areas where they came from. But I'm going to hone down more on the vegetation of the UAE and then associate that with some of the plants that are grown over here and are used for various cultural purposes. Now, plants have moved from one place to another, as we possibly all know. And there is good evidence, both archaeological and archaeobotanical, that almost 12,000 or more years ago, the domestication of crops, when it started, when civilization began, they had a very important impact on the distribution of plants from the original localities. So what we see today probably didn't originate here. It originated somewhere else, but it has been brought along when people started moving. According to some anthropologists, they say that by the middle or late Holocene, which is around, again, sort of like 12 to 13, 14 years ago, there was a surplus of crops. And that surplus of crops, the trade which started between different regions, was one of the main, what impact it had. It moved the plants, because when people moved, when they traded their plants, they carried their animals, and of course what the animals ate. They carried what they built with. They carried that aspect of the building materials and settled in others. So the movement of plants was not just the movement of plants as such. It came with the people and came with the civilizations. And I've just got a few, oh, I'm sorry. Gosh. A few examples of how this would have happened. The earliest ones that we know of is the Harappan civilization or the Indus Valley civilization. Then establishment with Egypt, establishment with East Africa, South Asia, Arabia, Southeast Asia. These have been studied. The crops and their genomic structure has been studied as to where they came from. So there is evidence where these crops came and were taken to. Trade existed between Northeast Africa, India, and Arabia around 1500 years BC. And by the end of the 3rd millennium BC, there was established trade between the Persian Gulf and Red Sea. And whenever we talked about established trade, we can see what was being traded. It was mainly plants, animals, and other things that are associated with it. This is the kind of crux of my talk today. If you lose a species, that also means that you lose a history and a culture that is associated with that species. Of course, as we all know, there is a big strive for conservation because species are being lost. The whole of the biodiversity is in a bit of a flux at the moment. Development, organization, you know, all that sort of, as we can see around over here. Plants can be cultivated everywhere. It is true. We can take a plant, we can cultivate it where its best climate is available, but we lose the culture that is associated with that plant. We can't take that culture and do that, and I will give you some examples later on in the talk. But just to mention how the plants moved in, and what do we actually know about that when they started to be documented. The earliest known botanic gardens, so we know, is in Egypt, or was in Egypt. And these were basically all either funerary gardens or gardens which were associated with temples. They grew the plants which would be given to the gods or offered to the gods. And Egypt was one of the places where apparently the temple of Karnak, many of you may have visited, they know something about that. It was rectangular in outline. It had a row of date palms, wine, and probably at some stage, they think that it was basically a pleasure garden. The Greeks, of course, described. They took on to themselves, the very educated people they were, they took on to themselves to describe, but they didn't actually create gardens. So that was Theophrastus. He based his Historia Plantarum. He had a garden and listing only about 500 plants, and he would teach from that. One of the earliest gardens that we know, which also imported a lot of exotic trees, was that of Sennacherib in Nineveh in Iraq. And this we go back almost 700 to 600 BC. And it is believed that this garden had exotic trees, it had beautiful shrubs, it had a very, very good watering system, and a lot of it has now been excavated, and it is believed that this was actually the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which we all so much know. This all comes from reliefs which have been found over there. It comes from the cuneiform text on clay tablets, giving sort of details of what the trees were. And looking at the flora of Iraq, which I'm associated with at this time, not much of that actually was present or is present. These were all imported. These are all exotic trees. So this was mainly one of the first examples of a garden as such, of bringing in imported. Then we have things which are culturally associated. And one of them, which is one of my favorite paintings, is that from the British Museum. It shows Bilqis, or Queen Sheba, and she is waiting for a letter of invitation from King Solomon. There's a little hoopoo just underneath the acacia tree, or just on the side of the acacia tree. And in this painting, there are quite a lot of plants. I mean, she's sort of reclining by the brook, and there are plants around. And I think that these plants are not just being put there as decoration, but I think they have a meaning. For example, the acer under which she's sitting, we associate it is associated with constraint or retirement. The iris, which is painted at the back, gives faith and wisdom, because Sheba was extremely wise, and so was King Solomon. The hollyhock, which is planted with red flowers, that gives ambition or aspiration, and probably shows on Bilqis herself. And the acacia shows platonic love, or concealed love, or secret love. So these are kind of associations that plants carry with them, especially in this painting. That painting was one, but there's also something which I always look at, is the accuracy in paintings. Are the paintings, especially those with plants in it, are they accurate? And this one in the National Gallery of Edinburgh shows the nativity scene with Jesus and Joseph and Mary. But I was looking at the tree. I mean, look at the tree at the back. And it is a Washingtonia type of a play. It's a palm, one of the trees which have got, the ones which are over here. Now, we know that this palm does not grow in the whole of the Arabian Peninsula. It can be Africa, but certainly over here, it would be the date palm, but that was not depicted. The lower one is that of Jonah and the whale. I mean, if you know the story of Jonah, the whale takes him and then spits him out. And it is still controversial, but certainly look at the plants which are growing right at the edges. They are more like lilies, and nowhere over in Iraq, where it's supposed to happen, you get this kind of vegetation at all. So this is, something, well, yeah, there is not always the accuracy of paintings when these paintings are historical. So the movement of plants, we believe, or actually understand, that it was the Chinese who were the first developers of botanic gardens in the sense as we know them now. And Wu Ti, the emperor of China, he, during the Han Empire, he sent lots of people, I mean, his whole entourage or to different parts of the world so that they could bring back medicinal plants, plants that were edible, and then they were cultivated in China. And since a very long time, through the Silk routes. And there's a sketch map of the old Silk Road, and it was very prolific where they could go and can bring back seeds and other plants. Through the Silk Road, and these plants, I think we all know, the grape, the pomegranate, cucumbers, the safflower, walnuts, even coriander, which is a very Mediterranean plant. These were all brought back and brought into cultivation in China a long time ago. So now coming down to the Arabian Peninsula and to the UAE. So how rich is our land flora? This is the basic native plants, nothing to do with the cultivated plants, which are plenty over here, but just the native plants. In the whole of the Middle East, we reckon, I mean, nobody knows the exact numbers, so we reckon there are more than about 5,000. In the Arabian Peninsula, there are about 3,500. And that includes the very rich diversity which is found in southern Arabia, Yemen, and the northeastern side of, or northeast side of Saudi Arabia. Yemen is the highest, as you can see, Saudi Arabia, Oman. UAE comes a little bit in the middle with about 650. And they keep on increasing with the help of our local botanists over here. So this habitat map was produced in 2016 by the Abu Dhabi Environment Agency. It was a very good sort of bringing together the botanists and the ecologists of this region so that a habitat map could be made of the Arabian Peninsula. So the whole of the Arabian Peninsula was done, and this is just the part which is the United Arab Emirates. So the colors signify what areas there are. And as you can see, the mountain areas are very few. As you well know if you've been living over here, majority of the areas is basically the sand sheets and the intertidal salt marshes, tidal flats. Just one by one, I will go rather fast. These are the mountains and rocky terrains, a very interesting part of the UAE, up in the northern part of the UAE, where you can find vegetation coming directly from Africa, but also from across the Arabian Gulf or the Persian Gulf, from Iran. And there is always a lot of influence of the Iranian vegetation and as well the African vegetation. Some of the plants which are, you will probably know all these, Acacia tortilis with a beautiful umbrella-shaped structure, and a shrub which is next to it, which is a very significant shrub called euphorbia with a white latex. Quite poisonous. Goats don't eat that at all. They know. Another part of the habitats which also has got very beautiful flowers is a cousin, as you may say, of the fig. On the left-hand side is Ficus johannis, one of the lilies, quite common. Physorhynchus, another plant, and some of the parasitic plants. Now, these always grow up in the mountains, and they are also common in Iran, in Balochistan, just across. It's too hot in the plains for them to live, and they're quite well adapted. Oh, a few more plants. One of the most beautiful plants which I've ever come across in these areas is the one which is pictured down there. It is a cousin of the almond. It's called wild almond, Prunus arabica. It yields very bitter almonds, but they're not edible at all. But during the flowering season, it's the same thing. They flower first, and then the leaves come out. So it's a very beautiful sight. And you can see them in Jabal al-Jais. They're quite common. Then, of course, I can't remember the ordinary name for that, the plant which is just over the Gladiolus, the Gladiolus, and the small shrubs. So these, again, are plants which go right across into Iran and to southwest Pakistan. The inland plains, even though they are small, are extremely well developed over here. So you will see cultivation of date plums, date groves. There are farms, especially farms with camels and goats. So there's very little natural vegetation now present in the inland areas of the UAE. One of the most interesting part of, I think, the Arabian Peninsula on the whole are its deserts. These are the sand dunes and sand sheets. So the dunes are quite high. They can go up to almost 150 feet, and they're stabilized. Then there are, of course, the lower moving dunes, or those which are not stable. And then, of course, there are sand sheets, which some are stable, and some, they get blown away. And some of the plants are absolutely quite spectacular in this. One of the things that brings the life to this desert are the fogs. Early morning, as you may have seen, especially in January, February, March, the difference of temperature between the day and the night and the warmth of the land, it brings on dew and fog. And this condensation, as you can see in this photograph, which is taken by one of the people over here, that is what actually gives this greenery to the desert, and that is quite important. So the plants, when they flower, they do have this opportunity which they take from the air as dew, and that's their life in a way, gives them their life. Also in the dunes, of course, the most beautiful parts are the trees which are the ghaf trees. They are prosopis, natural to the whole of the Arabian Peninsula, and sadly, they are dying. And in parts of Oman, I've seen dead forests of prosopis. It's because prosopis has got very, very long roots, and it grows in clusters as well. And the roots try to reach the water, which is fairly low down. Depleting the aquifers, as we are doing in the whole of the Arabian Peninsula, taking the water out, it depletes the aquifers or makes them lower down, and which gives death. Or they are normally the flows of the wadis, where the natural flow of the water would take place, sink down and spread out. Building or construction or any sort of stopping the flow of the waters is also very relevant. Once that is done, the vegetation which lives on that water flow dies. These are absolutely beautiful areas, and two of the rare plants, one is the one which is photographed in the middle, is Tribulus Arabicus. I wouldn't say it's rare, but it is only found in certain locations. It has to be very sandy, and suddenly you'll come across these very beautiful yellow flowers. The other one is the one which is further down, which is Haloxilon, and that too is only found in only one part of the UAE. It comes into Saudi Arabia, but only in one part of the UAE, by the desert. Again, a few more nice photographs together with the hair, the local and small gerbil, which all live in the desert and feed on the plants that are there. Mangroves is another very important part. These are, as you probably all know, the intertidal ways. Now, I'm going to switch off to the plants that are being used for cultural purposes, and I will go into 2 or 3 parts. These are the ones which are used for medicinal purposes. Medicinal plants is not anything new. People have been using it ever since civilization. That's what they had to depend upon, and they learned it from the animals. They learned it from themselves by trial or error methods. They are used for much of the plants that are used in the Arabian Peninsula are used for digestion problems. A lot of them are used for curing skin problems, stings, sunburn, and some of them are used as health tonics. They have whether they are actually health tonics or not, but they have a belief in people that they're good for your health. So I'm just going to take one example of, this is called the donkey melon, and if you've been out in the desert, you will have seen these. They're a very common plant, colocynth, and how this information about the use of plants has been carried from a very long time, since the 2,000 years in ancient Mesopotamia, through 800 to 500 years BC, to the medieval Eastern medicine, and then its uses now, or at least in parts of the Arabian Peninsula, as it is used now. So these have been used, and you will see that to some extent, they have been used partly in a similar manner. And this information has been carried from a very long time through various means, through people who had written from one set of writings to another set of writings to another set of writings, through civilizations, really. And this is how folklore, you may call it, or information of plants is carried on. So some of the plants that we all are very familiar with, one of them, which is iconic, is the date palm. Now, as I was saying, you can take a plant out of its context. I think California in the United States is one of the best producers, or the vast producers, of dates. But they do not have the same association of the date palm as the people who are over here in the UAE. There's an old Arabic saying, it says, the uses of date palm are as many as the days in a year. So everything in a date palm is used, from the seed to the fiber to the fruit, of course, and it's used in many, many, many ways. So it is an iconic plant for the UAE, and we should remember that. We should always consider it as a part of the Arabian world, of the Arab world. The domestication of date palms, however, started a very long time ago, and this was a recent work which was done by the University of Oxford, where in Saudi Arabia, they actually found some rock art showing the actual date palms. So from there on, we understand that the date palm is actually indigenous to the Arabian Peninsula. We always thought earlier on that it probably came either from Africa or possibly from Asia, but now we have good evidence to say that it is probably originated in the Arabian Peninsula. It is mentioned, of course, for the people who follow the religion Islam. It's mentioned several times in the Quran. It's also mentioned several times in the Bible. And therefore, it again, it has a certain value to it. It is because of the fact that it is such an important plant, it carries a certain culture and a certain value to us. The first coins which were known, 700 AD, just after Islam, they had the date palm on it. Then, of course, because it was such an important tree, there were many other coins which had date palm on it. In Palestine and in other parts as well, they're used on gravestones. So date palm is a very, very iconic plant for the Arab world, associated with every aspect of our lives. Amongst the medicinal plants, I think everybody knows Habba Suda, which is like a tonic. It does everything for you. This is a plant which has been mentioned again in the Quran. It's Eastern Europe, goes from Turkey to Iran, and it is of multiple medicinal uses. I'm not going to go deeply into this because of my time limit over here. Fenugreek is another plant which is halba. And again, as I think we know that it was known, it is one of the oldest plants, cultivated plants. It's mentioned in the Assyrian medical texts, and again through translations, through the uses, it is still used in much the similar manner as it was used thousands of years ago. The Murda plant, Calotropus. Now, I've seen it growing over here as well. So this is also fairly medicinal, although the medicinal uses of it are few. And I think it's lost a lot of its medicinal value simply because it does carry cardiac glycosides, and it is not always something that you want to eat or have. But one of the examples of its use is that the white latex which comes out of it, it's quite burning. It will burn your skin. So if you have a boil or a sting which a thorn has gone in, normally the villagers will put a drop of that, which kills a little bit of the skin around it, and it takes away the infection. Please don't try it. Sena, I think, again, another one of those plants, which is very common over here. Sena, the lower photo, which is Sena Italica. The top one is Sena Alexandrina. It's an Egyptian Sena which was grown in Alexandria or exported from there, and that's why it's called the Sena Alexandrina Sena. Again, it is still used as a laxative in parts of the central region of Oman. I've seen it in central parts of Saudi Arabia. Again, this is very much a plant which is associated with the Arab world. It doesn't come into the other deserts of the world. Other plants, Cardamus or safflower, Soncus or Tamarindus. I mean, these are all, again, plants which have certain culture or medicine which is associated. You can get Tamarus indica anywhere in the world, but they will not use it in the same way as perhaps people who live in India or Pakistan or in the Arab world will use it, especially during Ramadan. Then we have some plants which are mostly like tonic. Now, these are not necessarily indigenous to the Arab world, but they have been brought into the Arab culture and have been grown over here for a very long period of time. Licorice is an example of that. Licorice doesn't grow over here naturally, but it is used over here as a drink, as a sweetener, and it's now, of course, known everywhere. But there is a certain culture over here that is associated with sus or licorice as a cough syrup. This is another iconic plant. Nobody knows about it outside the Arab world, I think. And if you have a stick in your mouth, people think that you're half mad, or what are you doing with a stick in your mouth? This is the mustard plant, or miswak, or arak. It is very much followed over here, even to this day. And it is a plant that if you go for Hajj, it is there, it will be given to you as you can buy it or you can take that from there. because it is believed that Prophet Muhammad cleaned his teeth with it or used it as a dental stick. So it's very much, again, ingrained in our culture and in our, amongst, not necessarily amongst the Muslims, because it is used amongst the Christians as well in the Arab world. All used for as a toothpaste. Now, of course, they've made toothpastes out of it and powders and things. This is one of the festivities plants. Now, we all know what Lawsonia inermis or henna plant is, and I think at every stage of a child born over here, for a birthday, for Eid after Ramadan, for marriages, it is something that is done very commonly. Lawsonia inermis again, has a history. It was used by the Egyptians, and just to some extent, it is believed that the Arabs did not use it right at the beginning, but the use of the henna came via the Egyptians. So the Egyptians knew about it because it also grows in Iraq and so, and because of the trade, it went to Egypt, where the Egyptians were the first ones to use it. And this is through its name, its etymology. It's believed that it came that way. And of course, now it's used so commonly, from staining hands to coloring hair and also medicinally, it is used to cool. So people in the desert, when they walk on the sand, on the hot sand, they always put henna, so they always cool their feet, the soles of their feet, with henna. Beautiful plant. Yeah, I won't. It is still used, and I would just like to say the Moroccan Jews use henna in the traditional ceremonies, in particular in weddings, as it is used in much of India and much of Pakistan, where the elders of the family smudge henna on the palms of the groom and the bride to give new couple a good health. And I think that's very much followed amongst the Indian nation as well. Some of the cultural plants, a very quick thing, one of them, which is again very common over here, is anastatica. It is called Kaf Maryam, or the hand of Maryam, and it is believed that Jesus' mom, Maryam, she held that plant while she was giving birth. Now this is, I do not know where that came from, but because it looks like a closed fist, it is one of the plants that is made into water, sort of given like an infusion, and given to pregnant mothers so that their childbirth is easy. Now, this is quite a common practice in Oman. I do not know about over here, but I've seen it in Sinai. It is again used in Sinai in Egypt, Oman, yeah, and a very, very pretty once it's like that there. And the last one that I'm going to talk about is pomegranate. Pomegranate, of course, has quite a value amongst the Muslims because it's mentioned again many times in the Quran. It is now, of course, considered as an antioxidant. But pomegranate doesn't actually belong over here. It doesn't come as a natural vegetation. It's a Persian plant, but it was brought over in Oman where it is grown. I think a lot of people now cultivate it. But it is, again, one of those plants which has moved from its origin to everywhere, but holds a certain value to it, a sort of cultural value to it. And that is it. Again, I would just like to reiterate, preserve a culture and preserve your heritage and preserve plants. It's through plants that we can manage to preserve these culture, our values. And as the old Egyptian saying, eat a pomegranate, visit a bath, your youth will haste back. Thank you very much.